Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from around the world today for this digital forum to highlight how restoration can support a healthy climate, economy, and planet. My name is Rosario Perez, and I will be your host for today. We have an exciting schedule starting with our opening plenary, followed by three one-hour sessions, each bringing to our attention a key challenge and opportunity for forest and landscape restoration. Simultaneously, translations in English, French, and Spanish is available in Interaxio. Please find the link in the chat or below to live stream. If you're having trouble, please ask one of our chat moderators. In order to also hear from you, the audience, we'll be using the interactive digital tool Slido. So please have your mobile devices ready and go to slido.com and enter the hashtag #RestoreTogether. And to get ready to take part in this conversation, because we definitely want to hear from you all. Also, please post your questions and comments using the chat function on the event page, or if you're tuning in on social media on Facebook. Join the conversation on social media using the hashtag #RestoreTogether. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Masunda Mumba, Vice Chair of the Collaborative Platform on Forests and Chair of Global Platform on Forest and Landscape Restoration, to officially introduce this digital forum.
Thank you so much, Rosaria. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, wherever you are in the world, greetings. I'm excited to be here, and my name is Musonda Mumba. I'm the director of the UNDP Rome Center for Sustainable Development, as Rosaria has said, and also chair of GPFLR and vice chair of CPF. And the fact that you've actually joined in and registered and come to this event, that means you're interested and you're doing something about restoration. So we want to know. So you were told about Slido. So if you're on Slido on your phone or your tablet or your computer, please go to Slido with hashtag #RestoreTogether and respond to this question. And the question is, what does restoration mean for you? What does it mean for you? And I'll be looking at the responses and talk about that. In the meantime, I'm absolutely excited to be here as your host and moderator, and we have amazing speakers for this panel. We have seen the challenges that the world has faced in the last few months, and really the realization, as we saw from that film, that with degradation comes a lot of problems: the loss of biodiversity, our very livelihoods, the very medicines that we've depended on for millennia, food systems, climate crisis, fueling violent crisis, and all those problematic issues that we've actually experienced, and people have experienced in different parts of the world. As such, this particular panel will be really looking to explore and talk about, through this digital forum, and introduce the Forest and Landscape Restoration Implementation Hub. So without further ado, I would like to have a look at that screen on the Slido. If we can have a look at that. Wow, this is looking good. This is looking good. I see bring back life, maximizing benefits, hope. Hope. I love that someone has actually mentioned hope there. Improvement, return to original state. I wonder what that original state is, though. That's a big question, and maybe some of our panelists will respond to that. Okay, what other question? Degrowth. Healthy ecosystems. This is fantastic. Improvement again. Community. How do we become responsible communities? This is absolutely exciting. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first video message that we're going to receive from His Excellency, State Secretary of the German Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, Minister Jochen Flaschbach. And we have that 5-minute video that is going to stream shortly. Over. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the role of nature-based solutions in our efforts to tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis is receiving more and more political attention. For example, this topic is at the heart of discussions in the ongoing G20 preparations under UK presidency and in the COP26 preparations. I very much welcome these developments. However, we should not lose sight of our ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We also have to ensure social and environmental integrity in the implementation of nature-based solutions. One of the most promising nature-based solutions that allows us to approach the climate and biodiversity crisis in a holistic way is the restoration of degraded ecosystems. Well-functioning ecosystems have direct benefits. They are important habitats, indispensable carbon sinks, and provide irreplaceable livelihoods for local bio-based economies. Those were the ideas which 10 years ago prompted our engagement in the Bonn Challenge. What we now refer to as nature-based solutions were already incorporated into the Forest Landscape Restoration (FLR) approach, which lies in the heart of the Bonn Challenge. This clear approach, mainly developed by IUCN, has provided clear proof of the success of restoration. Another remarkable feature of this approach is its universality. Forest landscape restoration can be applied to the mangrove forests in Indonesia as well as to the mountainous rainforests in Rwanda. It can be used for the shaded coffee forest in Ghana and an agroforest community in Guatemala. The beauty of FLR is also that it considers human beings and ecosystems as components of one single unit, which have to be well balanced. I see today's forum as a very good opportunity to share insights and perspectives on accelerating progress on forest and landscape restoration amongst FLR partners, and I applaud GLF for organizing this event. The process of restoration sends an urgently needed signal that after decades of overexploiting our ecosystems, we can reverse this trend with nature-based solutions. The restoration of ecosystems not only provides economic benefits, but also a vision that extends beyond individual disciplines, borders, and interests. It restores not just our ecosystems, but also our future. We need this positive message to help spark the necessary transformational change to successfully implement the 2030 Agenda. This is an important reason why my ministry supports and continues to support initiatives like the Bonn Challenge, the Global Landscape Forum, and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Together with IUCN and other partners and with the support of the International Climate Initiative, we have taken initial steps for developing an FLR restoration hub in Bonn. The project has not started yet, but we are joining forces to get the preparation phase underway very soon and hope to have a fully operational hub by the end of next year. This hub will give a major boost to the implementation of restoration activities that will in turn help us achieve the various targets set out for 2030. I wish you all here today fruitful and forward-looking discussions on ongoing and future restoration activities.
Minister Flashbach, the importance of this positive message looking forward to 2030 and really accelerating action, and also really bringing on board the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is getting launched very soon in June. Very exciting. How do we not leave people behind? So exciting to have this FLR implementation hub that is going to be established and really sort of put into motion. Job creation, reducing threats to biodiversity, but also making sure that there's a complementarity between the adaptation and mitigation conversations as they happen through the Rio Convention on Climate Change, G7, G20, he refers to that, and also the other critical conventions, the one on land, CCD, and also biodiversity. Very important message. We have a fantastic panel of experts who are going to talk about the very subject of nature-based solutions under this topic, on actually what does restoration mean for you and how do we really enhance activities. The first speaker, so I've got a set of three speakers. The first is going to be Bruno Oberle, who's the Director General of IUCN. And the next speaker is going to be Fran Price, who's the Forest Practice Lead for WWF, the World Wildlife Fund organization. And the last speaker on this panel, lastly but not the least, of course, is Manish Bhopna, Acting President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. Welcome to all three of you. Fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much for coming, seeing familiar faces. I want to start with Bruno. You listened to Minister Flashbach's message there, and really he talks about the challenge the world has found itself in, particularly that this global catastrophe. I mean, in present history, this is since the World War, the Second World War, we're in a crisis, a tremendous and problematic crisis. There are real risks to obviously the way we knew life, as it were. And also there's a danger that as we kind of see improvements, people are hearing about vaccinations and they're thinking, oh, we can go back to the old life and go back to normal. And then it begs the question, what is needed to ensure that nature-based solutions, particularly restoration in particular, is prioritized? And what opportunities should we seize in building back or building forward better, depending on the lens that you're viewing it from? Over to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much. My best greetings to all the people that is engaging in this dialogue. It's great to be here. Yeah, this is something that it's occupying our minds, right? We are in the pandemic. We see in some part of the world light at the end of the tunnel. In other country, less, sadly. But we have to reflect about what it is bringing to us in terms of understanding of the situation. The pandemic has not changed completely the reality. It was already previous to the pandemics that, for example, to put it in the word of the Skupta's review, that our societies and our economies are fully embedded in nature, that we use nature for all our needs, that we overuse the amount of nature that we have for our society, that we are diminishing the reserves and the capacity of nature to regenerate, and we are not reinvesting into the natural capital. So we use too much and we don't rebuild. And this is, of course, it is like you have an account in the bank and you take and you too much and you never put in. So at one moment you will run out of money, and at one moment we will run out of nature. And this will be a catastrophe, much bigger catastrophe than to run out of money. We have to remember that a lot of our needs, fundamental needs, food, air, water, are relying on natural processes and are relying on the work of the biodiversity and relying on nature. Now we have to learn to take less and to reinvest. We have captured from these 1.5 years how important commons are and how far we can reach if we engage all together. And this is what we should do now also for nature. IUCN has launched an initiative, nature-based recovery initiative. We want states, startup actors, societies to restart our economies, but to restart it better than it was previously. We are investing a lot of money in our economies. So far, we have counted up to 17,000 billion US dollars that are put in our economies, and we would this money to be invested in a way that it is not contributing to further depleting nature. On the other side, we want a substantial part of that money to be spent in a way that it recreates natural capital. The two elements we said before, we should stop taking too much and we should reinvest. And this is what we can learn to do with these recovery packages. Building back, but better. Building back, then greener, respecting nature. And of course, restoring nature is one fundamental way where we could put money in, invest in restoring the natural machine. Invest in nature and you will get a better life as a dividend.
I absolutely liked your bank analogy, because we're over, taking out and not replenishing. It's problematic. Great to hear about this initiative, the Nature-Based Solutions Recovery Initiative. This is fantastic. to really get action. And thank you for your reference to the Dasgupta report on our dependence on nature. Manish, I want to turn to you. Given the increasing recognition and support for restoration in addressing these global challenges as we see them and as we've experienced them, and meeting obviously the national development priorities, why aren't we doing more of this and really having these actions, as Bruno has mentioned? What are some of the critical implementation challenges, and how can we overcome these challenges, as it were?
Great, thank you, Musonda, and a privilege to be here with all of you. I really wanted to underscore Bruno's points, both the point that the pandemic didn't break the world, but reveal the world that already was broken. And I really love the image of the bank account. So I'm going to give you another image. Think of a jigsaw puzzle. And I think part of the challenge we have with implementation around forest and landscape restoration specifically, or nature-based solutions more generally, we tend to focus on individual pieces of what it takes to actually create a more inclusive and more sustainable restoration, nature-based solutions. We tend to look at individual pieces, and part of the problem is no one is looking and recognizing that multiple things have to happen at the same time. So when you think about a jigsaw puzzle, I just want to pick out 3 pieces that I think haven't gotten that much attention in the past, and why I think this effort that we're launching today is so incredibly exciting and important. The first is just the importance of building adequate local capacity. That if we want truly an inclusive approach to landscape restoration, we need to invest in those local champions, the entrepreneurs, the local financial institutions, the local governments that are going to be on the front lines of building out that restoration. And a part of that challenge is also creating the technical capacity to develop more bankable projects. So looking at both local capacity of local communities, of entrepreneurs, local governments, kind of one piece of the puzzle that doesn't get much attention. The second piece is working with governments in the technical capacity to help build projects that are able to attract financing at scale. What we have oftentimes now, finally, some fairly significant interest from large public financial institutions, from large private financial institutions to help support investing in restoration. But how to actually design projects that meet the finance where that is, getting that investment readiness, that bankable projects, is the second piece of the puzzle where more investment needs to be made. And the third kind of piece is just the enabling policy environment. All too often, I remember working on landscape restoration over 20 years ago in India. And we did this multi-state study looking at why did landscape restoration take off in some states so effectively, but not in others. Thinking about tenure arrangements, thinking about benefit sharing arrangements, thinking about the incentives that local communities to have to trade and recoup the revenues from products generated through landscape restoration. Those things matter. And finally, a piece also is around monitoring, making sure we understand what is happening in terms of restoration. So these are just some pieces of the puzzle that I think are quite important for us to get right. And what is quite exciting is this hub, this forest and landscape restoration hub that we're launching, is focusing on many of these pieces that have not gotten the attention that they deserved over the years. So that's why today is so exciting.
No, thank you, Manish. I love the jigsaw pieces. And in reality, for you to be able to see the picture better, the pieces have to come together. And looking at the system as a whole, unfortunately, we've looked at this in a very sort of piecemeal approach, as you have said, and this is really great. Tenure, benefit sharing, monitoring, enabling policy environment. This is absolutely fantastic. And also hearing about, governance issues, capacity level, and entrepreneurship. It's really incredible that we're beginning to see that sort of emerging now. But there's still a lot of work to do. So I'm turning now to Fran. Fran, WWF, I enjoyed my time when I worked for WWF. At the country level, you have such incredible experiences where you've seen good progress around, restoration, particularly restoring of degraded landscapes and deforested lands, Costa Rica, Rwanda, Pakistan, and Malawi. What do you see as the key factors underlying these successes?
Thank you, Musonda. And it really is a privilege to be here with you all today, talking about this absolutely critical issue. And, you know, when we look at what has been successful and with forest landscape restoration, and as you mentioned, Musonda, WWF has been working at this along with partners like IUCN and WRI for decades now. But many of the elements are those puzzle pieces that Manish mentioned, that community engagement and governance systems and models that are as close to the ground as possible, that really enable ownership over restoration work and the benefits that come from that work, that this work that's really tailored to the local context, and that community engagement ownership is absolutely key from what we've seen in terms of success. Private sector engagement and public-private partnerships, which are really able to mobilize capital, which are able to bring investors and finance, project developers who are able to bring capacity building and technical assistance, as Manish mentioned, and help with readiness work. And then businesses whose supply chains land in given landscapes, and either for because of their leadership commitments or because of their business models, there are many who are getting engaged in restoration and who have been engaged in restoration because of those commitments and because restoration is part of the model. And as Manish mentioned, also those policy frameworks that enable forest landscape restoration and tenure rights are at the heart of those frameworks that are needed and that have worked. Because without rights recognition, you can't have long-term restoration. It just doesn't work. And we also need long-term policy commitments, because restoration is a long-term endeavor, commitments that go beyond political cycles. And we need that long-term financing as well, because you know, this is not just about a one-time tree planting effort. It's a long-term effort, and we need the appropriate incentives and disincentives, like payments for ecosystem services, like tax breaks, et cetera. So there are a variety of things that have worked in the countries that you mentioned. And another thing that I will emphasize is the institutional infrastructure that needs to be in place to help with capacity building, to help with delivery of forest landscape restoration. And that also needs to be there for the long term. And then finally, again, what Manish mentioned is monitoring, to not only understand the baseline from where you start, but to track progress over time and to enable you to make adjustments if needed in your efforts. So those are some of the key factors that we've seen in those countries where we and our partners have been working for so long. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I'm actually reading a fantastic book by Roman Krznaric called The Good Ancestor. And it talks exactly about how you stated that, you know, how can we have this long-term policy commitments, long-term thinking, and avoid this short-termism, which is, of course, in a lot of political systems have been designed around. How do we rethink this future? And you really touch on these elements, you know, payment for ecosystem services and all of that, which I find very interesting and quite important for also that readiness and for things to happen on the ground. I like the PPP, you know, private-public partnerships, which also feeds into what also the theme for the G20 is, you know, focusing on people, planet, and prosperity. How do we have that element of convergence? This is absolutely fantastic. Now, thank you so much for that, Fran. Bruno, I want to come back to you. Minister Flashbach mentioned in his intervention, in his speech, and made reference to the Bonn Challenge. And I know that IUCN obviously has been responsible for it. How has the initiative as the Bonn Challenge really helped to build awareness, support, and political will for restoration? And what experiences can we learn from the Bonn Challenge as we now embark on this, incredible journey with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration? Over to you.
I mean, as Manish and Fran has already also explained, we need to speed up our engagement for nature in the end, in coming out from the pandemic, and then afterwards, continuing investing into our natural capital. We need sound knowledge. We need political will. We need capacity, funding, private sector, and we need inspiration. And there is a number of sources of inspiration that came to my mind now. One is really what is happening in the climate sector. We have learned so much from the climate debate, how to bring the climate risks into a finance discussion, how to engage with the private sector, displaying to their eyes the opportunities that such a transformation of societies and production and consumption pattern would disclose for them, and how we were able to create so kind of pilot of engagement to inspire and learn. In our sector, the Bonn Challenge is one of such pilots. We have countries and other entities that have pledged to restore over 200 million hectares of degraded land, and this is something that it was going over the expectation, and we have to take this readiness to engage politically on the issue of restoring land, forest, and landscape as an inspiration. As Fran was mentioning, it is a long-term endeavor. Let's say the pledge is the starting point of a very long process of implementation, but it is a very important starting point. The Bonn Challenge and the ways in which it was brought to countries and private sector is one source of inspiration for this work.
This is absolutely fantastic. I like that you actually bring the word inspiration, which also came up in the word cloud when we just started on Slido. We need to be inspired, and also back to the jigsaw puzzles, how these pieces come together and how we have to make sure that we connect to other different sectors and the climate sector as an inspiration. Thank you for that. I want to turn to you, Manish. There's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm around planting of trees. We hear this one, there's a million over there and another billion and so many numbers and people out there, and then all of a sudden we just don't hear about it. But in many people's minds, they think that when they hear the word restoration, it just really means we need more trees, and there's some element of confusion there. But restoration encompasses more than planting trees, obviously, and it covers, productive landscapes, coastal grasslands, urban, spaces, and much more, and really much wider. So how can we reach out and build a more deeper and wider coalition of restoration champions, but also investors and participation, to see that restoration is really key to their work and interests in what they do on an everyday basis?
No, it's a great question, and I think the enthusiasm for tree planting and for restoration is I haven't seen enthusiasm like this in the last 20 years, and much of it is in no small part through a climate lens. I think the momentum around climate has created an incredible amount of interest in landscape restoration or tree planting more specifically. And so this is quite an important moment. It's kind of almost a once in a generation moment, because if that money is not programmed well, it can be an incredibly wasted opportunity. When you look at the issues that both Fran and Bruno mentioned, to do this right is not easy. And there's a concern a little bit that money that isn't spent thoughtfully on those kind of institutional, local capacity, governance, policy related issues, we're not going to get where we need to go. So just 3 quick thoughts on your question. 1, start with people. Landscape restoration is not about trees. You have to start with people. All of our institutions, we just spent 18 months in one district, Siddhi, in Madhya Pradesh, in India, doing active consultation, generating bottom-up plans of how they want to think about restoring landscapes in that small little district. Start with people. Second, it's about the right trees in the right places. There is a kind of a real, I remember in the 1970s, there was a tree shrub called mesquite in Mexico that was introduced in Kenya and had quite significant negative implications. It was so favorable to grow in Kenya, it wiped out all the native vegetation. Need to think hard about native species, right trees, right places. But as you said also, the third point, it's much more than just trees. It's about how we restore grasslands. It's about how we restore peatlands. Those non-tree related restoration opportunities aren't getting the same attention that they deserve. We need more data. We need more stories. We need to demonstrate the role and the importance of those other ecosystems to a healthy climate, a healthy economy, a healthy planet. After all, this isn't the decade of tree planting. It's the decade of ecosystem restoration.
Thank you. It is not the decade of tree planting, as you're all listening. It is the decade of ecosystem restoration, ecosystems, as it were. Fran, I come to you last now. So how do you see restoration in your mind sort of fitting alongside other solutions, particularly addressing the global challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and also the element of COVID recovery, alongside, say, transportation, energy production, and expansion of protected areas, and also increased spending on health? The fact that, we've been affected with our health with this pandemic, how do you see that in your mind?
Thank you, Musonda. It's a great question. So as we look collectively at the challenges that face us, and we know that there are certain things that we need to do, but restoration is a key tool in the toolbox, alongside the clear mandates around reducing emissions and decarbonizing our economies. In parallel, and just as urgently, we need to be addressing the loss of nature. And we need to be looking at nature-based solutions, which can provide 30% of climate mitigation opportunities. And from a forest perspective, there are 4 pathways within those nature-based solutions. One is stopping deforestation and conversion. One is preserving the forest sink, so the forest carbon sink. Another is improving the way we manage forests. And the fourth is restoration. And restoration is actually the second largest mitigation pathway when we think about those nature-based solutions. Because even if we stopped deforesting and converting our habitats today, we would not have enough forests to be our allies in the fight against climate change, in the fight against nature loss. So we desperately need to accelerate restoration. I was looking at some numbers preparing for this talk, and our tracking to progress under the New York Declaration has actually showed that restoration efforts have slowed in the last 10 years. So before 2011, we were averaging 2 million hectares a year. Post 2011, we've been averaging 1 million hectares a year. So we are, we're beyond at an urgent point here. But what is so exciting is, we're entering the UN decade. We are creating partnerships around implementation, like the implementation facility or hub that all three of us speakers, our organizations, are working on with the German government and other partners. So there's some incredible opportunities here, but the urgency is beyond belief at this point. Thank you.
No, thank you so very much, Fran. Really you highlight the importance of tracking and the fact that, we're not staying on course, and we need to really stay on course going forward. I really want to sincerely thank you all three, Fran, Manish, and Bruno, for your amazing and great interventions. And I just want to, really acknowledge and thank the audience for joining us, and also just highlight that, this Forest Landscape Restoration Hub is also your hub. You have to be a part of it. You have to be engaged. This is going to be one of the shining stars in the universe of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we're really hoping that it will be, have several flagship initiatives. And then in its implementation, it's looking at on-ground activities. What can we see on the ground, the change supporting communities, so that we see impact and also we see change, really tangible change. This FLR implementation hub is also going to be, some kind of global concept in responding to financing mechanisms. How can it support countries? How can it respond to different elements of forest restoration? And also, more importantly, how do we bring conversations and community? We saw that element of community in the cloud, which was really, really fantastic. So the focus will be threefold. It will be really looking at investment preparedness. It will be looking at capacity development, to also be looking at private sector mobilization and engagement. And really, even though it hasn't started, really we have planted the seed and action will begin. So I really want to thank you for being a part of this journey and for really listening in. And please look out for all the information, be it on Twitter, be it on all the social media sites, on the websites of the organizations that are represented here, IUCN, WRI, and WWF. Look out for this information, and there's a lot that we can do together going forward. Thank you so much, everyone, and wishing you a lovely and pleasant day ahead. Join in to the next sessions that are going to be happening. It's going to be exciting. Have a fun day, and all the best.